A struggling
Ma'am,
single
we don't mean
mom
any
had
trouble.
nothing
Just
but a
wondering if you might
small
have
wooden
some coffee.
cabin and her little girl to protect. Yet on a freezing night, she opened her door to 15 Hells Angels bikers, men her neighbors called criminals. But instead of chaos, the next morning, the entire town froze in disbelief as 100 roaring Harleys lined up outside her home, bringing food, firewood, and a promise of protection. Why would the most feared bikers in America repay kindness with loyalty? And if it were you, would you have opened that door? Comment your thoughts below, hit like and share, and don't forget to subscribe for tomorrow's story. The storm rolled across the Colorado mountains like an uninvited beast, swallowing the town in a curtain of white. Inside a small wooden cabin on the edge of the highway, Sarah Miller, a 35-year-old single mother, tightened her coat around her shoulders and stoked the fire. Her daughter, Emily, only 10, sat on the couch hugging a threadbare teddy bear, watching her mom with anxious eyes. Sarah tried to keep her voice steady, but the howling wind against the windows rattled the house in a way that made even her bones ache. Tonight was going to be long, and she knew the diner paycheck in her pocket wouldn't buy much comfort. It was supposed to be just another winter night, chili simmering on the stove, cornbread in the oven, and her daughter curled up under a blanket. But the storm had other plans. As snow piled higher against the front door, Sarah told herself that at least they were safe. Safe, that is, until she heard the sound that froze her blood. The low, thunderous rumble of motorcycle engines, muffled but unmistakable even in the blizzard. Moments later, a heavy fist pounded on the door. Sarah's breath caught. She wasn't expecting anyone, and no sane neighbor would be riding in this storm. She glanced at Emily, who whispered, "Mom, who is that?" Her own mind raced back to the whispers she had overheard in town. Hell's Angels are nothing but troublemakers, criminals on two wheels. Sarah had seen them once at the gas station, leather jackets, tattoos, hard stares. Now, as she opened the door a crack, snow whipped in, and she found herself staring at exactly what she had feared. 15 bikers, their jackets emblazoned with the infamous Death's Head logo. "Ma'am, we're stuck in this storm. We don't mean any harm, just need a place to warm up." Sarah's heart pounded so hard she thought Emily could hear it. Every instinct screamed to slam the door shut. But behind those rough exteriors, she saw exhaustion, desperation, and something she hadn't expected. Eyes pleading for shelter. Emily's small hand slipped into hers, and Sarah knew her daughter was waiting for her to decide. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you're watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. She stood there for a long moment, the storm swirling around them all, before finally stepping aside. "Come in," she whispered. 15 men, outlaws to the world, strangers to her, filed into her modest home. The tiny living room suddenly felt like a cage with predators inside, and Sarah's pulse hammered in her throat. She shut the door against the storm, but inside, a different storm was just beginning. The living room swallowed the bikers whole, its walls closing in as their boots thudded against the old wooden floor. Sarah's heart beat so fast it echoed in her ears. Emily clutched her teddy bear tight, peeking out from behind her mother's hip. The men peeled off their jackets, snow dripping onto the worn rug, steam rising from their damp clothes. The firelight flickered across their faces, tattoos coiled around arms and necks, shadows carving their expressions into something both fierce and weary. One of them stretched, his leather vest creaking, the skull patch on his back glinting in the dim glow. Sarah's hand trembled as she gestured toward the couch. "You can sit," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The older biker with the gray beard nodded once. "Thank you, ma'am." His tone was calm, but the gravel in it still made Emily press closer to her mother. They settled in like storm clouds lingering too close, the small house filled with the smell of wet leather and road dust. Sarah could feel every pair of eyes flick toward her and then away, as if measuring her courage, as if waiting to see if she would break. One of the younger men smirked, tossing his gloves on the coffee table. "Bet the neighbors would have a field day if they knew we were in here." A ripple of laughter moved through the group. Not cruel, but sharp, edged with a truth Sarah already knew. If word got out, she'd be branded reckless, maybe worse. Emily tugged at her sleeve. "Mom," she whispered, "are they going to hurt us?" Sarah crouched down to meet her daughter's eyes. "Stay close to me," she murmured, forcing a smile that didn't reach her own. "We'll be fine." Across the room, the gray-bearded biker leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Name's Mike," he said, looking straight at Sarah. "We don't want trouble. Storm caught us off guard. Just need a roof till morning." His voice was steady, almost tired. Sarah searched his eyes for something human, something that could outweigh the roaring stories she'd heard in town. Robbery, fights, drugs, words whispered in the diner over steaming cups of coffee. She thought of the sheriff's warning only last month: "If those angels come through here, keep your distance." Still, Mike's eyes weren't the eyes of a man hunting for chaos. They looked like eyes that had seen too many miles, too many winters. Emily peeked out again, her voice small. "You're bikers?" The younger man, who had laughed earlier, grinned. "That's right, kid. Scary, huh?" Emily ducked back behind Sarah, and the men chuckled, but it wasn't mean. It sounded almost sad, like they knew the role the world had written for them. Sarah drew a deep breath. "There's chili on the stove," she said finally, surprising even herself. "I'll get bowls." The room quieted. For a moment, the only sound was the fire popping. Then Mike nodded. "That's mighty kind of you." As Sarah moved into the kitchen, she could feel their eyes following her, not with hunger, but with a kind of disbelief. She ladled chili into mismatched bowls, hands shaking so hard she nearly spilled. Emily carried the cornbread on a chipped plate, her small frame tense, yet brave in her own way. Back in the living room, the bikers accepted the food with murmured thanks, voices low, almost respectful. Steam rose from the bowls, mingling with the scent of leather and snow. One of the men closed his eyes as he tasted the chili, letting out a long sigh like it had been years since he'd eaten something home-cooked. Conversation started slow, a word here, a chuckle there. Sarah sat stiffly in the armchair, Emily curled on her lap watching them. "You know," said the younger biker with the rough laugh, "cops pulled me over last week. Didn't do a damn thing wrong. Just saw the vest, the ink, treated me like I already belonged in a cell." Another nodded, tapping ash into the fireplace. "Happens all the time. We ride in a pack. People think we're a gang looking for a fight. They don't see we're brothers, trying to get from one road to the next." Emily's eyes widened. "But if you didn't do anything bad, why would they—" "Because of this," the man said, tugging at his leather vest. "People see what they want to see." Sarah swallowed hard, her chest tight. She wanted to deny it, to say the world wasn't like that, but she knew better. She had seen how the diner regulars whispered, how neighbors locked their doors when the rumble of engines rolled through town. Mike caught her gaze. "We're not saints," he admitted, "but we're not monsters either." The words lingered in the room, heavier than the storm outside. Emily whispered, "Mom, he sounds nice." Sarah smoothed her daughter's hair, unsure what to believe anymore. The storm battered the windows, but inside, another storm raged. The collision of fear, prejudice, and an unexpected flicker of trust. For the first time that night, Sarah realized the danger might not come from the men in her living room, but from the world that already judged them. The fire crackled, the bikers ate in silence, and the walls of her tiny cabin held a fragile peace, one snow-laden breath at a time.
The smell of chili drifted through the house, thick and comforting, a fragile thread holding the night together. Sarah carried the pot into the living room, her hands unsteady as she set it down on the table. Emily followed close behind, balancing a plate stacked with warm cornbread. The bikers shifted in their seats, their voices fading into silence as they watched the mother and daughter move about the room. "Bowls are in the kitchen," Sarah said softly, almost to herself. One of the men stood, towering over her, tattoos climbing up his neck like vines. Emily's grip on the plate faltered, but the man simply ducked into the kitchen and returned with mismatched bowls, stacking them carefully on the table. He gave her a small nod before sitting back down. Sarah ladled out the chili, steam curling in the firelight. She passed the first bowl to Mike. He held it in both hands like it was something sacred. "Haven't had a home-cooked meal in months," he muttered. The others followed, murmuring quiet thanks as bowls made their way around. Emily placed the cornbread in the center, then darted back to her mother's side. She whispered, "Why are we feeding them, Mom? They're scary." Sarah crouched, her lips brushing her daughter's ear. "Because when people are cold and hungry, you give them warmth. That's how we stay strong." Emily's eyes searched her mother's face, confused but trusting. As the men ate, the room changed. The sharp edge of danger dulled, replaced by the clink of spoons and the low hum of appreciation. One biker closed his eyes after the first bite, letting out a groan. "God, that's good. Tastes like home." "Careful," another teased. "You'll make the lady think you've gone soft." A ripple of laughter passed through the group, lighter this time, less like thunder and more like rain easing after a storm. Sarah sat stiffly in the armchair, Emily perched on her lap, both watching. She studied their faces as they leaned back, steam fogging the edges of the window behind them. They were rough, scarred, carrying stories she couldn't guess, but here they were, grateful for a bowl of chili in a stranger's home. The young man who had laughed before set his spoon down, staring into the fire. "Got pulled over last month. Didn't do a damn thing. Cop saw my vest, thought I was running drugs." He shook his head. "Didn't matter that I'd been clean for years. Didn't matter that I was just heading home. To them, I'm already guilty." A murmur of agreement rumbled through the group. Another leaned forward, his knuckles scarred. "People see leather and ink. They don't see men who've worked construction, men with kids, men just trying to ride free." Emily peeked up, her voice small but clear. "But if you didn't do anything wrong, why would they treat you bad?" The room stilled. All eyes turned toward her. The young biker gave her a half smile, tired and gentle. "Because sometimes, kid, people only see what they're afraid of." Emily blinked, clutching her teddy tighter. For the first time, she didn't look away from him. Mike broke the silence. "We don't expect you to trust us overnight, but we're not the monsters the town says we are." His gaze held Sarah's, steady and unwavering. Sarah's throat tightened. She thought of the diner whispers, the way the sheriff had leaned close to warn her. She thought of the neighbors who locked their doors when engines rolled down Main Street. Sitting here now, watching these men savor chili like it was salvation, she felt something shift. Emily tugged at her sleeve. "Mom, I don't think they're bad." She smoothed her daughter's hair, her mind torn between fear and something she couldn't yet name. She didn't answer. The men finished their meals slowly, every bite stretched as if they wanted to make it last. One of them reached for the cornbread, broke it in half, and offered the other piece to Emily with a tentative smile. She hesitated, then took it, nibbling carefully. The man grinned, as though the smallest act of trust was a gift worth more than gold. The fire crackled louder, filling the silence. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the cabin, another storm eased, just enough for breath to come easier. Sarah looked around her living room at the strangers who had filled it and realized the line between fear and compassion was thinner than she had ever imagined. The storm had not let up. Snow slammed against the windows like fists, the wind shrieking through the cracks in the old cabin. Inside, the fire burned steady, its glow pushing back the cold, but not the unease that hung in the air. Sarah tucked Emily into the narrow bed they shared, pulling the quilt high. The girl's eyes were wide, restless. "Mom," she whispered, "are they still out there?" Sarah brushed hair from her daughter's forehead. "Yes, they're in the living room." Emily swallowed. "Do you trust them?" Sarah hesitated, her hand lingering on the quilt. She wanted to say yes. She wanted her daughter to sleep without fear. Instead, she kissed Emily's forehead and whispered, "Close your eyes. I'll be right here." But when Emily drifted into uneasy dreams, Sarah couldn't keep her promise. She slipped from the bed, her bare feet cold against the floorboards, and cracked open the bedroom door. The living room glowed with firelight, shadows of leather and denim stretching across the walls. The bikers lounged in scattered silence. One sat at the table sharpening a knife, the rasp of steel loud in the quiet. Another leaned back, boots propped on the hearth, staring into the flames. Their laughter had faded. Now it was low conversation, half whispers and tired sighs. Sarah's pulse quickened as she stepped out. The knife rasp stopped. Eyes turned toward her, heavy, unreadable. She forced herself to the kitchen, poured water into a glass, and drank though her throat was dry. "You okay, ma'am?" Mike's voice came from the couch, steady as ever. Sarah lowered the glass. "Couldn't sleep. Storm like this, no one sleeps easy," he said. She nodded, unsure why she stayed standing there, why she hadn't run back to the safety of the bedroom. From the window, red and blue lights flickered faintly in the distance, patrol car headlights cutting through snow. Sarah's chest tightened. If the sheriff stopped, if he saw this, what would happen? One of the men noticed her gaze. "Don't worry," he muttered, pulling the curtain shut. "They won't bother coming up this road tonight." Sarah looked sharply at him. He gave a half-smile. "Storm's bad enough to keep the law in their own warm beds." Still, her hands trembled. The thought of being branded a criminal just for opening her door dug into her like ice. Emily's small voice broke the tension. She had padded out barefoot, rubbing her eyes. "Mom?" Sarah turned quickly. "Sweetheart, back to bed." But Emily stood frozen, staring at the man with the knife. He paused, then slowly set it aside, raising his hands like a man surrendering. "Just sharpening, not for you, kid." Emily blinked, then shuffled over to her mother, pressing against her leg. Mike's leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "She shouldn't be scared." "She's 10, Sarah shot back. "And you're you." A ripple of laughter stirred, rough but not cruel. Mike shook his head. "Fair enough." The room settled again. Sarah eased onto the arm of a chair, Emily curled behind her. For a while they just listened, the fire crackling, the storm raging. Then Mike spoke, his voice quieter than before. "Got a daughter myself. She's grown now, but when she was little, I used to sit up nights like this, listening to her breathe, thinking the world was too mean to let her sleep safe." Sarah studied him, the lines in his face, the heaviness in his eyes. It was a truth she recognized. "What happened?" she asked before she could stop herself. "The world got meaner," he said simply. "But she learned to fight, stronger than me now." Silence filled the room. Even the knife sharpener lowered his head. Emily tugged Sarah's sleeve. "He's like you, Mom," she whispered. Sarah's throat tightened. She wanted to deny it, to shield her daughter from making connections that complicated everything. But the firelight didn't lie. The storm raged on outside, beating at the windows. Inside, the walls of the cabin held something fragile, fear and mistrust, but also an understanding neither side had expected. Sarah finally stood, lifting Emily into her arms. "We should sleep." As she turned toward the bedroom, her eyes met Mike's. He gave a small nod, nothing more, but it carried weight. She closed the bedroom door behind her, pressing her back against it. Her pulse hammered not just from fear anymore, but from the realization that the danger outside might not be the storm or even the bikers in her home. It was the world beyond, waiting to judge her for opening her door. Morning crept in quietly, a pale light spilling across the snow that buried the town. The storm had broken, leaving behind a silence so heavy it pressed against the cabin walls. Sarah stirred, lifting her head from the pillow. Emily lay curled against her, breathing soft and even at last. For a moment, Sarah allowed herself the illusion of peace. Then came the sound, boots shifting on the wooden floor, low voices murmuring in the living room. The bikers were awake. She rose carefully, pulling on her sweater, and opened the bedroom door. The fire had burned down to embers, but the men were already packing. Jackets back on, gloves tightened, helmets in hand. They moved with quiet efficiency, like soldiers preparing for another march. Mike noticed her and gave a nod. "Morning, ma'am." Sarah's voice was rough from little sleep. "Storm's over." "Looks like," he said. Snow still clung to his beard, melted and frozen again. One of the younger men pulled the curtain aside, whistled low. "Damn! Town's gonna be digging out for days." Emily stumbled out behind her mother, hair messy, clutching her teddy. She blinked at the room full of leather and steel. "Are you leaving?" Mike crouched to meet her eyes. "Sun's up. Roads'll clear soon enough. Time for us to move on." She frowned. "But you don't have anywhere warm." His lips curved in something between a smile and a grimace. "We'll find our way. Always do." Sarah watched, uneasy. For all her fear the night before, seeing them gather their things so neatly, so quietly, felt strange, almost emptying. One of the men approached, holding out a folded blanket. "Thanks for letting us use it," he said. His voice was deep, hesitant. "Didn't want to take nothing that wasn't ours." Sarah accepted it, speechless. The bikers lined up near the door, helmets tucked under arms. Mike turned to her. "We owe you, more than you know." Sarah shook her head quickly. "You don't owe me anything. Just go safely." But Mike didn't move right away. His eyes held her steady. "You gave us shelter when no one else would. Folks'll call you crazy, maybe worse. Don't let it break you." The words hit harder than she expected. Emily whispered, "You're not as scary as people said." The younger biker chuckled. "Don't tell anyone. Ruins our reputation." The laughter this time was warm, soft enough to make Sarah's chest ache. They pulled on helmets, opened the door, and the cold air swept in. One by one, they stepped out into the glaring white, boots crunching on snow. Engines coughed to life, one after another, until the sound filled the valley like rolling thunder. Sarah and Emily stood in the doorway, watching them ride off, the trail of black tires cutting lines through untouched snow. Then, from across the street, a curtain twitched. Another window slid open. Neighbors' eyes, sharp and narrow, watching. Sarah felt their judgment like ice against her skin. "Look at her," a voice hissed faintly through the cold air. "Letting them in. What kind of mother does that?" Her throat tightened. She pulled Emily close.
shielding her from the stairs. The engines roared louder, fading down the road, and the house fell quiet again. But the silence outside wasn't the same as before. It was filled with whispers, with suspicion. Emily tugged at her sleeve. "Why are they looking at us like that?" Sarah forced her voice steady. "Because they don't understand." The child pressed closer. "But we do." Sarah's eyes stung. She turned away from the neighbor's windows, closing the door firmly behind her. Inside, the cabin felt too still, the fire nearly dead. She stared at the bowls stacked in the sink, at the crumbs left on the plate. Signs of strangers who would pass through her life, like a storm within a storm. For the first time in years, Sarah felt both stronger and more exposed. She had opened her door, and the world outside would never look at her the same way again.
The morning stretched into a brittle silence. Sarah and Emily moved through the cabin like shadows, tidying the bowls, sweeping up melted snow. The fire had died, leaving only gray ash, but the air still carried the faint smell of leather and smoke. Outside, the town was stirring. Neighbors shoveled paths, their heads bent low, but their eyes flicked toward Sarah's house with every scrape of a shovel. She could feel the weight of their judgment pressing through the frosted windows. Emily kept asking why people stared, and Sarah had no answer that wouldn't cut. By noon, the snow had softened, dripping from the roof in steady rivulets. Sarah stood at the sink, rinsing the last of the dishes, when a sound rolled through the valley. At first she thought it was thunder, but the sky was clear. Then it grew louder, deeper, like 1,000 heartbeats pounding in unison. Engines. Emily ran to the window, her small hands pressed against the glass. "Mom," she gasped, "they're back!" Sarah's stomach nodded. She wiped her wet hands on her jeans and stepped to the window. Down the road, a black wave surged through the snow. Motorcycles, row after row, headlights blazing in the pale sun. Not 15 this time, closer to 100. The ground trembled as they approached, the roar echoing off the mountains. Dogs barked, curtains snapped shut. Neighbors dropped their shovels, some retreating inside, others frozen in place. The procession slowed as it reached her cabin, engines rumbling in a synchronized growl. The street filled with chrome and steel, handlebars glinting, exhaust fogging the air like dragon's breath. Emily's eyes were wide. "There's so many." Sarah's hand found her daughter's shoulder, steadying her even as her own knees weakened. The first line of riders parked directly in front of the house, their bikes forming a wall of black and silver. Behind them, more and more lined the road, stretching so far Sarah couldn't see the end. One by one, the engines cut off, until the silence was somehow louder than the roar had been. 100 men stood in the snow, leather vests marked with the same skull emblem. Mike stepped forward, pulling off his helmet. His gray beard glistened in the sun. "Sarah Miller," he called, his voice carrying easily in the stillness. "You opened your home to us when no one else would. We came to thank you." He raised a hand, and several riders wheeled forward small sleds loaded with firewood, sacks of food, and heavy envelopes tucked into plastic bags. They set them neatly by her porch. Gasps rose from the neighbors clustered at their windows. Mike turned back to the crowd of bikers. "This woman and her daughter showed us kindness in a storm. From this day on, they are under our protection. Anyone who tries to harm them or shame them answers to us." The words struck like a hammer. Sarah's heart thudded as she glanced at the houses around her. Faces peered from every window, pale and wide-eyed. Emily kept asking why people stared, but now no one dared whisper. "They're not monsters, are they?" Emily whispered. Sarah knelt down, brushing hair from her daughter's eyes. Her voice shook as she said, "No, sweetheart, they're not." And for the first time since the storm began, Sarah felt something powerful stir inside her. Not fear, not defiance, but a fierce, unshakable pride. The street was quiet again, the roar of engines trailing off into the mountains. Snowflakes drifted lazily in the sunlight, the storm a memory now. Sarah stood frozen on the porch, Emily pressed against her side, the silence wrapping around them heavier than the thunder that had just shaken the town. At their feet, stacked neatly on the porch, was enough firewood to last weeks. Bags of canned food and fresh bread, and envelopes whose weight Sarah could guess without opening. Gifts from men the town swore were outlaws. Emily bent down, picking up a small package wrapped in wax paper. "Mom," she said, eyes wide, "they brought us cookies." Sarah swallowed, unable to answer. Her gaze shifted across the street, where neighbors lingered in doorways and behind windows. No one whispered now. No one dared. Their eyes followed her with something she hadn't seen before. Confusion, maybe awe, and just enough shame to make them look away when she met their gaze. Emily tugged at her hand. Why are they staring like that? Sarah crouched to face her daughter. Because people don't always understand what they see. But we do, Emily said, simply. Sarah smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair from the girl's cheek. Yes, sweetheart, we do. She carried the first sack inside, Emily at her heels. The cabin smelled of leather still, but now it mingled with the sharp scent of pine from the firewood and the sweet sugar of the cookies Emily held tight. Sarah set the bag down on the table, her hands lingering on it. Her knees gave way and she sank into the chair, staring at the pile of supplies that could mean the difference between hardship and survival. Emily climbed onto the chair across from her, swinging her legs. "Mom, do you think they'll come back?" Sarah thought of Mike's eyes, the way he had spoken with such certainty. From this day on, they are under our protection. She thought of the neighbors' whispers turning to silence, of the way the town's judgment cracked in that single thunderous moment. "I think," she said slowly, "they already gave us what we needed." "The food?" Sarah shook her head, tears burning the corners of her eyes. "No, something bigger." That night, when the lamps were turned low and the house was quiet again, Sarah sat by the fire with Emily asleep in her lap. The flames cast long shadows on the walls, but for once, they didn't feel threatening. But Sarah knew it wasn't about the town. It was about Emily, sleeping safe in her arms, learning the lesson only a storm could teach, that kindness could stand taller than fear, that courage could come from opening a door when the world demanded you close it. Snow whispered against the window, softer now, a lullaby instead of a threat. Sarah leaned back, closing her eyes. For the first time in a long while, she felt no shame in the silence, no fear in the night. Only the steady beat of her daughter's breath and the echo of engines that would never quite fade. Emily stirred, mumbling in her sleep. "They're not monsters." Sarah kissed her hair. "No, sweetheart, they're not." And as the fire burned low, Sarah Miller understood that her small cabin in the mountains had become something more than a shelter from the storm. It had become a place where fear bent to kindness, where prejudice cracked under the weight of gratitude, where a mother's courage had changed the way a whole town would remember a winter's night. At its heart, this story is not about bikers or a snowstorm. It's about the courage to choose kindness when fear whispers louder. Sarah Miller, a single mom with little more than a warm meal and a fragile roof over her head, decided to open her door to strangers that the world had labeled as dangerous. In that moment, she showed her daughter that compassion is stronger than prejudice, and that real courage is not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. Too often, we let appearances dictate our judgments. Leather jackets, tattoos, a patch on the back. Society paints a picture before a word is spoken. Yet this story reminds us that every person carries a history, a struggle, and sometimes a heart capable of gratitude beyond measure. The town judged Sarah. Neighbors whispered, questioned her character, even suggested she put her daughter at risk. But the following day, when 100 bikes lined up in front of her home with gifts and protection, those same voices fell silent. It was proof that kindness can ripple outward in ways we cannot predict. For us, the lesson is clear. Compassion is not weakness. It's the most powerful force we have to break through fear and misunderstanding. One act of humanity can shatter years of prejudice, change how an entire community sees, and plant a seed of hope in the next generation. If this story moved you, now it's your turn to keep it alive. Hit that like button so more people see it. Share it with a friend who needs a reminder of what kindness looks like. And don't forget to subscribe because we bring you a new story like this every single day. But most importantly, I want to hear from you. If you had been in Sarah's shoes, would you have opened that door, or would fear have kept it shut? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read everyone, and I know this community has so much wisdom to share. And if you enjoyed this, make sure to check out tomorrow's video. It's another incredible story about courage in the face of the unexpected. You won't want to miss it.